But I just want to finish off from where we left off the last time when we were looking at Nehemiah, because we've been straddling between the story of Nehemiah and then these Hebrews 11 stories of faith. Nehemiah is a story of faith. It's just we're spending a lot more time on that. But Nehemiah is a guy that was used by God. Our theme that we were working through is that God puts his hands on us so that we may become his hands and partner in his work, which is for our good and for his glory. And I love that Nehemiah gives us that as his life. He doesn't get to make the call as to whether God's hands gets put on him. That's God's prerogative. God decides who he uses and how he uses all of us, really. So, but there was something of Nehemiah's posture, something of his disposition, which we were learning from, and we saw that he was a man of reverence. He saw who God is, and he would constantly in his prayers be saying, "God of heaven, how great and awesome you are." And he was a man of dependence. He was always praying, even mid-conversation. He would be talking to the king, and like mid there, he'd just be saying, like, "Lord, help me to know what to say." Have you ever prayed like that? Like when you're just mid something, but like there was a dependence on God, and he knew that this heavenly deposit that he was sitting with, the thing that gave him this anguish for the people of God and the city of God, was from him. Like he knew it wasn't something that came from him. He had known about Jerusalem. He was gripped in a new way, and that had come from God, and all the promptings and the stirrings and the where do I go and what do I say and how do I do this was from God. So a man of great dependence. And it's amazing when you look at the first two, it's like he knew who God is, but he also knew what God had done and that God was going to continue to do. And by virtue of that, he had a response, and his response was one of obedience and allegiance. So obedience would flow from his life. He says in his first prayer in chapter 1 how he puts himself in the mix. You know, it's like he wasn't really part of the exile, and you know he was quite removed from it. But he says, "We haven't obeyed. We haven't obeyed you." So he kind of like repents, but he puts himself with the remnant. He's like, "I'm not going to separate myself from them." So like, "Hey, I've got nothing to do with these guys. They're the bad dudes. I was just here minding my own business in Susa." It's like, no, he puts himself with them. He identifies with them, and he says, like, we haven't obeyed you. And then he continues from there to live in obedience, moment by moment, as God leads him. And so his obedience flows from a place of knowing who God is and knowing that God is busy with something. And so we need to have a revelation of who God is, which brings us to a place of reverence, be totally dependent on him because he is the one that starts everything, keeps everything, and it's all for his glory and it's all for his redemptive purpose. So there's a dependence. But as a result of our knowing him and knowing that he is working, we are people of obedience. And then this allegiance, it's basically just a word to kind of state he was giving God the glory all the time. His life was about giving God glory, not taking glory for himself. And so in verse 17, he's now surveyed the wall, the state of it and what needs to happen. And he says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in." Again, he identifies himself with the people, we. "How Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build." You see, when people get like a notion of, hold on a second, God's busy doing something, I want to be a part of it. God is working. He's gripped the heart of Nehemiah. He changed the heart of King Artaxerxes. He's made provision for the rebuilding of the wall. He's brought Nehemiah here. Hey, he's about promoting the welfare of his people. He's at work. And as soon as they hear this, they're like, let us rise up and build. It's an amazing response. But that's what happens when you see God move. Want to be a part of it. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you are doing?" Another translation that I read reads, they mocked and they ridiculed. You see, like Nehemiah asks for safe conduct, like God prompts him to ask King Artaxerxes for safe conduct. It kind of sets the tone for almost like, hey, this is going to be plain sailing. You know, like the path has been created. We've got safe conduct from Susa all the way to Jerusalem. No one's going to take us out. We're not going to have any problems. And it seems like we're going to have a difficult-free journey here. This is a faith project that like God's just going to be in every little bit of detail, and we won't face any difficulty or any form of opposition. And then all of a sudden, opposition kicks in. Have you ever been despised by someone? You know what that feels like? I mean, that's a strong word. To be despised, not just one person, 3 people. I think it's just their names that like set them off on they were just in a bad mood because they were given these horrible names. But they despised us. They jeered at us. They mocked and they ridiculed. And I think Nehemiah could very easily in this point say, yeah, but why are we facing difficulty? Oh, hold on a second. No. This is meant to be plain sailing, like safe conduct all the way. Everything's working. Everything's kind of falling into place. No, here's opposition. Here's difficulty. So they ask him, are you rebelling against the king? So now they're bringing his identity and his credibility into question. Then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper. What an amazing response. He doesn't go to himself, he goes to God. The God of heaven will make us prosper. And we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. So Nehemiah has no intention of taking credit for this work. I would not be so bold to say that I've lived my life in that way, where things happen and I'm involved and somehow I just step away from all forms of credit or glory and say, no, it's all God. You're like let me just kind of blanket it. We as Christians have a way of saying things and getting the message out like it was my hands. See what my hands did, when we're eager to say, like, let me tell you of, but it's actually, no, it's God's hands upon me. His work, His glory. He takes the credit. He's the one that's doing this. And he doesn't put himself in the center of the story. I mean, we read Nehemiah and we think Nehemiah is the center of the story. We've got to read this knowing that God's at the center. And Nehemiah is just a picture of Jesus, who left a place of privilege just like Nehemiah did, who was a cupbearer, and Jesus was our cosmic cupbearer, who identified with humanity. As Nehemiah said, we're in trouble. We have sinned. Jesus never said that we have sinned because he never sinned, but he did come as a human, and he said, we're in trouble, but I'm here to bear the judgment for the trouble that we are in. So when we read this story of Nehemiah, we actually need to see Jesus. And when we see the story, we mustn't say, well, how am I Nehemiah today? Because that's how we read the Bible, right? Story of Nehemiah, and then, like, we can't all be Nehemiah. It's like in the day that we are in now with what God's doing, we are the servants. We, his servants, will arise and build. Like, let us be the nameless ones, the ones that don't put our name forward and promote ourselves, but we're saying God is busy. He's doing a work, and that's what Nehemiah does. So Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, they're the ones who are power hungry and self-promoting. And the outcome of that, Nehemiah says, you won't have any portion or claim or right to Jerusalem, to this city of peace. So, like, the outcome of being power hungry and self-promoting is that there's no claim, no portion. But we, his servants, when we give God the glory and we realize it's his story, not mine. I'm not going to grab his glory. I'm going to give him his glory. I'm not going to steal his story. It's actually his story. I just get to be a part of it. We're his servants. The outcome of that is that we will have a portion, claim, and right to the celestial city of peace, which is our forever future. See, the challenge is to not be grabbing hold of it now and seeing the glory of God even in difficulty, because in that, his redemptive work is at work. He is bringing people to himself. And our lives, we step out of the center and we point to him. And that's exactly what Nehemiah does.